Jordan Mercado was about to rescue the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. The only problem was, she was going to be furious about it. He crouched behind a pallet of KMC-stamped reactor components, the recycled air of the transport ship's cargo hold thick with the coppery smell of overworked circuits and hot metal. The familiar acidic thrill of doing something profoundly stupid for what felt like the right reason churned in his gut. The constant low-frequency hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the deck plating into his bones. Sweat trickled from his hairline into his eyes. The sting, a minor annoyance compared to the rhythmic clank of the guards' mag boots. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. A lazy, confident patrol. The kind of confidence that gets people killed, or, in Jordan's case, gets them roped into galactic incidents. His focus wasn't on the guards. It was on the new shipment. A dozen Quarn, their reptilian-esque features schooled into the dull subservience demanded by their new masters. They were tall, even when hunched, their green and brown scales muted under the harsh utility lighting. Each wore the tarnished silver glint of a subjugation collar. Jordan's stomach tightened. He'd seen those collars his whole life on Acheron's Folly, a constant, ugly reminder of the boot pressing down on everyone's neck. One of the guards, a stocky, fleshy alien with a face like a slapped ham, got bored. He shoved one of the Quarn, a smaller one near the back, barely more than a youth by their standards.
"Move it, scale scum. Fresh air and hard labor await."
The Quarn stumbled, her three-fingered hands catching her fall against a bulkhead. For a split second, before the mask of fear and submission snapped back into place, Jordan saw it. Her head lifted, and her yellow, slitted eyes met his across the dim hold. It wasn't fear he saw in that fleeting moment. It was a spark of pure, undiluted indignation, a flash of a mind that knew this was wrong, this was an injustice, and it was furious. And for a gut-wrenching moment, they weren't a Quarn's eyes. Then, just as quickly, the spark in the Quarn's eyes was gone. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed, her entire frame crumpling back into the posture of a victim. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen that fire inside people before, in spacers who'd lost their ships, in miners who'd lost their limbs, and he'd watched the universe try its damnedest to extinguish it. He misread her fury as fragility. He saw her spirit on the verge of being broken, and the ghost of the one he'd let break whispered in his ear. And his bleeding hard conscience, the one he'd tried to drown in cheap synthale and kill with apathy for years, whispered a single disastrous word. Her. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. Jordan had spent a week loading ore onto this very transport, memorizing its guts. He knew its power conduits ran like cheap veins along the main cargo corridor, barely shielded, a flaw of corporate cost-cutting he was about to exploit. He slid from behind the reactor components, a jury-rigged power spanner in his hand. The guards were at the far end of their patrol, their backs to him. He had maybe 20 seconds. His hands, slick with sweat, didn't shake. This was his element. Machines made sense. They had rules. People were the chaotic variable. He pried open a service panel, the metal groaning in protest. Inside, the thick, insulated cable thrummed with latent energy. He clipped the spanner's magnetic jaws onto the conduit's positive and negative terminals. He didn't bother with finesse. Finesse was for people with time. He just jammed the handle down. The result was spectacular. A deafening crack-boom echoed through the hold as a geyser of blue and white sparks erupted from the panel, showering the corridor in a blinding flash. The main lights flickered and died, plunging the hold into the crimson glow of the emergency strobes. Alarms shrieked, a discordant symphony of panic.
"What in the hell was that?"
One guard yelled.
"Power surge! Check the breakers!"
The other shouted, his voice tight with alarm. That was his cue. In the disorienting pulse of the red lights, Jordan was a ghost. He vaulted over a stack of nutrient-paced crates, his boots slapping softly on the deck. The Quarn were in a knot of confusion, their heads darting back and forth. He zeroed in on the small one. He grabbed her arm. It was thin, corded with muscle under the rough spun tunic, and she was shockingly light. "Come on," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "This way, now!" For a moment, she resisted, her reptilian eyes wide in the strobing light. He didn't give her a choice. He pulled, harder this time, dragging her away from the group and towards a maintenance hatch he'd left unlatched. He half-shoved, half-threw her into the dark, narrow space. "In! Go!" He scrambled in after her, slamming the heavy hatch shut behind them. The alarms became a dull, muffled thud. The darkness was absolute. The air grew cold and stale, smelling of old dust and wire insulation. He could hear her ragged breathing, shallow and quick, next to him. His own heart was a trip hammer against his ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and stupid, stupid pride. He'd done it. "Crawl," he whispered, fumbling for the grab rungs he knew were there. His palms slid on the greasy metal. "Stay right behind me." They navigated the cramped maintenance shafts by touch and memory. It was a grimy, claustrophobic journey through the station's unglamorous intestines. After what felt like an eternity of scraped knees and muffled curses, he pushed open a ventilation grate. It squeaked in protest before opening onto a dusty alleyway behind the main settlement thoroughfare. He dropped the 3 feet to the ground, landing in a cloud of rust-colored dust, then turned and held up his arms. "I've got you." She slid through the opening and dropped into his arms. For a moment, she was just a weight, a trembling presence against his chest. Then he set her down. The distant sound of station security sirens started to rise. "No time to waste," he said, grabbing her hand. "My place is close. It's safe." He pulled her along the shadowed back streets of Acheron's Folly, his heart pounding with the pure, uncut thrill of a good deed done well. Jordan's safe house was less a sanctuary and more a testament to a life lived on the ragged edge. A single room above a cantina called the Bottom Rung. It was cluttered with spare parts, greasy coveralls, and the lingering smell of desperation. The constant, low-frequency thump, thump, thump from the bar below vibrated up through the soles of his boots, a familiar, unwelcome heartbeat. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and his own sweat. He kicked the door shut behind them and threw the heavy magnetic bolt. The thump clank of the lock was a deeply satisfying sound. He turned to the Quarn. She stood in the middle of the room, looking small and lost, her posture still hunched, her eyes cast down. She was trembling, either from fear or the adrenaline of the escape. "You're safe now," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He felt a swell of protective pride that was both unfamiliar and intoxicating. "They won't find you here." He crossed to his small kitchenette, which was really just a hot plate and a water synthesizer, and filled a dented metal canteen. He held it out to her. "Here, drink." She took it with a shaky hand, her 3-fingered grip clumsy around the container. She drank deeply, the water spilling down her chin and onto the rough fabric of her tunic. He watched her, a genuine smile touching his lips. He'd done it. Against all odds, against his own better judgment, he'd actually saved someone. He hadn't stood by this time. He'd acted. The ghost of a past failure, a distress call ignored, a ship lost with all hands, seemed to recede just a little. This felt good. This felt right. The Quarn woman finished the water. She didn't hand the canteen back. Instead, she set it down on his cluttered workbench with a deliberate clink. The sound cut through the noise from the cantina below. She looked up at him. The fearful, subservient expression he'd seen since he grabbed her just melted away. It didn't fade. It vanished, like a mask being dropped. In its place was an expression of cool, analytical amusement. Her lips, which he'd thought were thin and grim, pulled back into a smirk that was equal parts predatory and patronizing. "That," she said, and Jordan's brain short-circuited. Her voice wasn't the broken, guttural approximation of basic he'd expected. It wasn't simple or unsophisticated. It was a low, perfectly pitched contralto. Each word shaped with an elegant, formal clarity. Each word enunciated with condescending exactness. "Was the single most idiotic and tactically unsound rescue I have ever witnessed." Jordan just stared, his mouth hanging open. The words refused to compute. He was still trying to process the sheer shock of her voice when her hands moved with a speed that belied her previous meekness. From a hidden fold in her ragged tunic, she produced a flat, metallic object, no bigger than his thumb. A key. She pressed it to the side of the subjugation collar. There was no struggle, no frantic prying, just a specific point on the lock mechanism. A sharp crackle of discharged energy, like static electricity on a grand scale, and the lock clicked open with a definitive snap. She removed the collar and tossed it onto the workbench next to the canteen. It landed with a heavy, final clunk. Then she stood up, and up, and up. The subservient hunch she'd maintained was an act, a painful contortion of her true frame. She uncoiled from her 5.5-foot crouching to a towering 8 feet of pure, undiluted authority. Her shoulders, which had been slumped in defeat, broadened with a powerful grace. She stretched, her long neck arching, the muscles in her back rippling under the thin fabric. She was no longer a victim. She was a monument. Jordan took an involuntary step back, his hand coming up as if to ward off a blow. He felt like he was looking at a different species entirely. She picked up the metallic key, which he now saw had a small, glowing stud on its surface. She pressed it. "Tal-isk reporting." She spoke into the device. Her own language flowed out, a complex cascade of clicks, deep vowels, and sibilant hisses. It was fluid, intricate, and utterly incomprehensible to him. But the tone was universal. It was the sound of a general giving orders to her troops, and from the crisp, clipped responses he could faintly hear from the device, her troops were listening. She finished her transmission and turned her piercing yellow eyes back to him. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of weary pragmatism. "Well, human," she said, her voice a silken blade, "you have just single-handedly advanced the start of my revolution, and simultaneously become my single greatest liability. We have much to discuss." Jordan's brain finally rebooted. "Revolution? What? Who? What are you?" he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at her. "My name is Tal-isk, she said, her voice devoid of any of the previous amusement. It was now flat, all business. "And I was in the process of infiltrating Warden or Capo Trenk's command center. My capture was a calculated part of a multi-stage insertion plan." She gestured dismissively at her ragged tunic. "This disguise, this posture, the feigned compliance, it was all meant to get me close to Orcapo Trenk's inner sanctum. I had a 4-week timeline." She pinned him with a glare that felt like it could strip paint. "Your impulsive intervention has rendered that entire strategy obsolete." No. I'm not involved in this. I'm just a guy. I load ore. I owe money to a crime boss named Rorik for a very stupid card game. My only plan is to get my ship back and disappear. You can take your revolution and... No. She cut him off. The single word, an impassable wall. You misunderstand the situation. You are already involved. Your choice was made the moment you decided to play the hero. I thought you were... Helpless? She finished, a hint of her dry wit returning. A common and conveniently racist assumption, perpetuated by the KMC to justify our enslavement. The collars are not merely for obedience. They are translators, deliberately poor ones. They filter our complex syntax, our philosophical grammar, into the monosyllabic grunts you believe to be our native tongue. It is easier to enslave a beast than a person. The revelation stole the air from Jordan's lungs. The entire foundation of his understanding of the Quarn was a lie. A carefully constructed, brutally enforced lie. "But why me?" he finally managed. "Why are you still here? Why not just leave?" "Because your blunder, while catastrophic, has presented an opportunity," Tal stated, beginning to pace the small room. She moved with a liquid grace her size should not have allowed. "Before my insertion, my people spent weeks identifying potential assets. Your name came up. We have eyes everywhere. The quiet ones who sweep the corridors, the ones who refuel the transports. They see much." She stopped pacing and faced him. "They saw you jury-rig a hydraulic lift with nothing but a wrench and a string of profanity. They saw you bypass a 3-level security lock on a spice shipment you were unofficially rerouting for this Rorik. You possess an intuitive, non-regulation understanding of this station's infrastructure, its power grids, its maintenance shafts, its communication relays. These are systems my people have been barred from. You know the station's secrets." Her gaze was intense, analytical. "Your significant debt to this crime boss makes you predictable, and therefore controllable. Your low social standing makes you deniable if you are captured. My original plan is ruined, but a new one is forming. Your chaotic interference has forced my hand, but your unique skills make you an invaluable asset." She leaned down slightly, her shadow falling over him. Her yellow eyes were ancient and sharp. "You are my skeleton key, Jordan Mercado, and you will help me open every door." "Let me get this straight," Jordan said, his voice a strangled squeak. "You want me to pose as the Vulture, a notoriously psychopathic off-world mercenary, to acquire military-grade plasma charges from a paranoid supply chief who skins people for fun?" "An exaggeration," Tal corrected from across the room. "He only skins people for profit. And yes." She shoved the surprisingly clean, if slightly too tight, black shirt at him. "Put this on. It appears more mercenary than your grease-stained coveralls." "I'm a mechanic. Grease is part of the uniform," he protested, but pulled the shirt on anyway. It constricted uncomfortably around his shoulders. "This isn't going to work. I can't threaten a pot plant." "You will not need to," she said, holding up a tiny earpiece. "I will be your voice. You will simply repeat what I say. The supply chief, a man named Corrigan, is expecting a representative of the Vulture. He will not be expecting me. He will, however, be expecting a human. It is the perfect arrangement." "Perfectly insane," Jordan muttered, letting her fit the earpiece. "What if he asks me something you don't know?" "Then you will do what you do best, Jordan Mercado. Improvise." The meeting took place in the back room of a grimy parts supplier. The air was thick with the scent of metallic dust and cheap stimulants. Corrigan was a weasel of a man, with nervous, darting eyes and a laser pistol strapped ostentatiously to his hip. "You're the Vulture's man?" Corrigan asked, not bothering to offer her a seat. Jordan squared his shoulders, trying to look imposing. He felt like a child playing dress-up. "I am," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Deeper," Tal's voice echoed in his ear, calm and commanding. "Pitch your voice down. Tell him, the Vulture grows impatient. The merchandise or your spleen. He's not particular about the order." Jordan swallowed hard. The Vulture is impatient," he recited, his voice wavering. "He wants the merchandise or your, spleen." Corrigan raised a skeptical eyebrow. "The Vulture I've heard of is more creative." "He is feeling sentimental today," Tal supplied him. "Tell him he has decided your skull would look plain on his trophy spike. He requests you do not force him to reconsider." "He thinks your skull would look plain," Jordan stammered, sweating profusely, "on his spike." This was a disaster. He sounded less like a terrifying mercenary and more like a man trying to order a complicated drink. Corgan was starting to smirk, his hand drifting towards his pistol. Panic flared in Jordan's chest. "Improvise," she'd said, right? He reached for the heavy glass on Corgan's desk, intending to slam it down on the table to make a point to show some vulture-like aggression. But his palm was so slick with sweat that the moment his fingers closed around it, the glass simply slid from his grasp. It flew sideways, not with force, but with clumsy momentum, splashing lukewarm synthale all over Corgan's chest before clattering to the floor and rolling under a shelf. Corgan sputtered, wiping at his shirt. "What in the blazes?" "I was thirsty," Jordan blurted out, the first idiotic excuse that came to mind. "This is not going as planned," Tal Isk-Ur's voice said, with the faintest hint of what might have been exasperation. As Corgan bent down to curse at the stain, his jacket parted. Tucked into his belt, behind his back, was a data slate with the unmistakable logo of the KMC Warden's office, and sticking out from under the shelf, right next to where the tumbler had rolled, was a crate overflowing with vials of Nova 8, a highly illegal and extremely valuable combat stimulant. Corgan had his own side hustle. Jordan's panicked brain seized on it. "The Vulture also knows about your deal with Warden Orcapo Trenk," Jordan said, his voice suddenly steady. The lie came easy. "And your private stash of Noval 8? He thinks a cut of that, plus the plasma charges for free, would be a fair price for her silence." Corgan froze, his face paling. He looked from Jordan to the crate, and back again. The weaselly fear was back, tenfold. He had been caught. An hour later, Jordan was hauling a heavy, unmarked crate of plasma charges through the back alleys, his heart still racing. Back in the apartment, Tal Isk-Ur inspected their prize. "Your methods are unorthodox," she conceded, running a long, scaled finger over one of the charges. "But the result is acceptable." "Unorthodox? I almost got us killed. And then I blackmailed a guy. That wasn't the plan." "The plan was to acquire the charges," she corrected, not looking up. "The objective was met. The methodology is irrelevant." She paused, then looked at him, a genuinely curious expression on her face. "You function remarkably well under extreme duress. Most beings freeze or flee. You appear to weaponize incompetence. It is a fascinating, if terrifying, survival trait." The tension from the botched but successful mission lingered in the small apartment for hours, thick and greasy like the air itself. Jordan found a strange solace in the familiar ritual of maintenance. He laid the plasma charges out on a clean rag on his workbench and began checking their power cells and trigger mechanisms. It was work his hands understood, even when his brain was still reeling. Tal Isk-Ur watched him in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the scrape of his tools against metal and the distant, muffled beat of the cantina's sound system. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than he'd heard it before, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "Why?" Jordan didn't look up. "Why what? Why am I checking for KMC trackers on contraband we stole via blackmail? Seems prudent." "No," she said patiently. "Why did you risk your life, your precarious existence on this moon, for a stranger you believed to be helpless?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unwelcome. Jordan stopped working, his knuckles white where he gripped a micro driver. He felt the old shame, the one he kept locked away, rattle its cage. He defaulted to his usual defense. Sarcasm. "I don't know. Temporary insanity. A deep-seated desire to have my life hijacked by a towering revolutionary lizard lady. Pick one." She didn't rise to the bait. She just waited, her yellow eyes steady and unblinking. She wasn't demanding an answer. She was simply holding a space for one. It was somehow more effective than any interrogation. Jordan let out a long, shaky breath and set the tool down. He stared at the half-assembled plasma charge, but he was seeing something else entirely. A star chart, a blinking red light on a console, a comms channel crackling with static. There was a freighter, he said, his voice low and rough. A rust bucket called the Morning Star. A few years back, I was running a priority cargo for medical supplies. My first big solo contract with the stray dog. I was behind schedule, burning fuel I couldn't afford. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his tired eyes. I picked up a distress call. Subspace tear, bailing life support. They were about 6 hours off my course. 6 hours there, 6 hours back. I would have missed my delivery window, lost the contract, probably the ship too. So He trailed off, the memory tasting like ash. I turned down the volume. I pretended I didn't hear it. I made the delivery. He finally looked up at her, the self-loathing clear in his eyes. I found out a week later at a portside bar. They found the wreckage. No survivors. A family of 4, just trying to make it to the outer colonies. He gave a bitter, humorless laugh. I got a bonus for being early, and I've been running from that bonus ever since. So when I saw you, when I saw the guard shove you, I couldn't turn down the volume again. Tal Isk-Ur was silent for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. She was processing it, not with sympathy, but with a kind of intense academic curiosity. She was trying to understand the illogical, inefficient calculus of human guilt. So, your action was not born of strategic advantage or a logical assessment of risk, she stated, more to herself than to him. It was an emotional reflex, an atonement. She looked at him, and for the first time, he thought he saw something other than a general or strategist in her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was a flicker of understanding. That is a profoundly inefficient way to live, and yet you are still alive. It wasn't absolution, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement, and coming from her, it felt more meaningful than a dozen hollow reassurances. The intel is solid, Tal said, pointing a long, clawed finger at a flickering map projected onto Jordan's wall. A KMC security patrol makes a supply run through this service canyon every 3 days. Their shields are weak. Their route is predictable. It is the perfect location to test our new acquisitions. Perfect, Jordan echoed dryly, checking the charge on his own blaster pistol. It was an old, beat-up model, but it was reliable. I love perfect locations. They're usually the first place people set up an ambush for the ambushers. Tal Iksur gave him a withering look. Your cynicism is noted and accounted for. We will be in position an hour before they are due. The service canyon was a narrow, rust-colored scar carved between 2 massive ore processing facilities. Pipes and power conduits snaked along the walls like metallic vines. They found a perch on a maintenance sledge 20 feet up, offering a clear line of sight to the canyon floor below. They waited. The distant hum of the processors was the only sound. An hour passed, then another. So much for predictable, Jordan muttered, shifting his weight. Patience is a virtue, Jordan Mercado, Tal Isk-Ur chided. So is not getting shot. I think my virtue is better. That's when the world exploded. Not below them, but above. A high-energy plasma bolt slammed into the rock face just over their heads, showering them with superheated rock and dust. Trap! Jordan yelled, stating the screamingly obvious as he flattened himself against the ledge. Blaster fire erupted from both ends of the canyon, pinning them in a deadly crossfire. Red bolts of energy stitched across the opposite wall, getting closer with every shot. This wasn't a patrol. It was a kill box. Warden or Capo Trenk's security forces. We have to pull back, Jordan shouted over the din. Negative, Tal yelled back, her voice cutting through the noise with chilling clarity. Retreat is a death sentence. The path isn't back, it's down. Down? Jordan yelled incredulously. Down is a 30-foot drop into solid duracrete. Not solid, she corrected, already priming one of the plasma charges. She pointed with her chin at the corroded pipes beneath them.
The station schematics show a sublevel maintenance conduit directly below this canyon. The floor here is the thinnest point.
Before Jordan could process the terrifying implications of that, she hurled the plasma charge. It wasn't aimed at the troopers, but at the cluster of thick pipes running directly beneath their ledge. The charge stuck with a magnetic thunk. "What are you?" The charge detonated with a concussive whoomp. The shockwave didn't just shatter the pipes, it blew the unstable rock of their perch completely inward. The ledge gave way with a sickening groan. They didn't dangle, they plunged. The world became a chaotic blur of falling rock and snapping supports, ending with a bone-jarring impact as they landed in a thick, tangled nest of insulated conduits and support mesh on the sublevel below. Dust and debris rained down around them, but the crossfire was gone, now raging uselessly, far above their heads. Jordan lay on his back, gasping for air, every muscle screaming in protest. Tal-Isk-Ur was already on her feet, blaster in hand, her eyes scanning the dark, narrow space. "You blew the floor out from under us?" Jordan finally managed to gasp, pushing a chunk of rock off his chest.
"I created an exit where there was none,"
she stated, her tone flat and final.
"The objective was to break the kill box. Objective met."
She glanced back at the hole they'd fallen through, a ragged maw of twisted metal against the canyon light.
"Now move, before they realize we've gone."
Jordan just groaned and staggered to his feet, following her deeper into the utility corridor. "Next time," he wheezed, "a little warning would be nice."
"The Union is our best bet for a human ally,"
Tal declared, dabbing a sealant patch onto a nasty gash on Jordan's arm from their unconventional retreat. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to her personality.
"The KMC suppresses their wages by using my people as leverage. If the Quarren are no longer a source of cheap labor, the corporation will be forced to negotiate with the human miners on fair terms."
"Makes sense." Jordan winced as the sealant stung. "Only problem is, the Union leader, a guy named Kovac, hates my guts. He thinks I'm a scab lover because I don't complain enough about Quarren stealing our jobs. He's not going to listen to me."
"Then he will listen to me,"
she said simply.
"The colony's Founding Day Festival is tomorrow. The entire settlement will be out. Security will be lax, distracted. It is the perfect cover to arrange a meeting."
The Founding Day Festival was a cacophony of forced cheerfulness. The air was thick with the sizzle of mystery meat on portable grills and the overlapping tinny music from a dozen different stalls. Brightly colored banners hung limply in the dusty air. The KMC broadcasted a looped message of corporate goodwill over the public address system, a bland, robotic voice wishing prosperity upon the colony it was actively strangling. The grumbling of miners who'd lost credits at games of chance mixed with the shrill laughter of kids high on sugar paste. Jordan found Kovac near a test-your-strength carnival game, trying and failing to make a high striker bell ring. Kovac was a broad, powerfully built man with a permanent scowl etched onto his face. "Mercado," Kovac grunted, spotting him. "Come to celebrate your corporate overlords?" "Kovac, I need to talk to you," Jordan said, keeping his voice low. "I've got nothing to say to you." Jordan's plea fell on deaf ears. Kovac was about to turn away when a tall, cloaked figure stepped out of the shadows behind Jordan. Tal-Isk-Ur, her face hidden in the deep cowl of a borrowed cloak, was an intimidating presence.
"Mr. Kovac,"
she said, her voice a low, resonant hum.
"Jordan Mercado is correct. You and I have a common enemy."
Kovac bristled. "I don't deal with Quarren, especially not one who's hiding her face."
"I hide my face because Warden or Capo Trank wishes to see it on a spike,"
Tal-Isk-Ur said calmly. She took a step closer.
"The KMC tells you we are the reason for your hardship. That is a lie. The KMC is the reason. They use my people as a whip to keep your union in line. They use your economic anxiety as a cage to keep my people enslaved. We are pitted against each other so that we do not look up at the ones holding the chains."
She laid out the cold, hard economic truth. A successful Quarren uprising wouldn't just free the Quarren. It would shatter KMC's labor monopoly. It would give the Union a bargaining position they hadn't had in decades. Kovac was silent, his brow furrowed. He wasn't swayed by altruism or a sudden burst of interspecies kinship. He was a pragmatist. He was swayed by the undeniable logic of her argument, by the promise of leverage and better pay for his people. "You cause a big enough mess," he finally said, his eyes hard, "and my guys will stage a full walkout, sabotage the ore conveyors, give Orcapo Trenk a two-front war he can't win. But you fail. This conversation never happened."
An acceptable arrangement,
Tal agreed. As Kovac walked away, a new man in their corner, Jordan felt a giddy sense of relief. He looked at Tal, then at the stupid carnival game Kovac had abandoned. "You know," he said, a grin spreading across his face, "I bet I could ring that bell."
"The physics are simple," she observed. "It is a matter of applying force to the exact fulcrum point."
"It's a matter of hitting it really, really hard," he countered, picking up the mallet. He swung with all his might. The puck shot up the track and hit the bell with a satisfying ding. A small automated dispenser spat out a prize, a cheap, brightly colored pinwheel. Jordan picked it up, a goofy grin on his face. He turned to Tal Isk-Ur, and to his utter astonishment, she was laughing. It wasn't a smirk or a dry chuckle. It was a genuine, open-mouthed laugh, a low rumbling sound that was surprisingly musical. The sight was so unexpected, so disarming, that Jordan started laughing too. Amidst the noise and the dust and the corporate propaganda, they stood there for a moment, a human mechanic and a towering alien general, sharing a moment of unguarded, ridiculous joy over a cheap carnival prize. Later that night, the mission a success and the festival crowds thinning, they stood by the single window in Jordan's apartment. The pinwheel was stuck in a crack in the windowsill, spinning slowly in the breeze from the ventilation unit. Outside, the gas giant Acheron orbited filled the sky, a swirling canvas of orange and purple clouds. The easy camaraderie of the festival had faded, replaced by a comfortable silence.
"It is a heavy thing,"
Tal said softly, her gaze fixed on the distant planet.
"This title, the first flame of the uprising. It was given to me after I led the first successful raid on a KMC armory."
Jordan leaned against the wall, content to listen.
"The first flame must be a symbol,"
she continued, her voice losing its commanding edge, becoming something more personal, more weary.
"It must burn brightly, without hesitation. I cannot show doubt. I cannot show fear. I cannot have friends. It has been a very long time since I have spoken to someone without weighing every word for its effect on morale, or its strategic implication."
He looked at her profile. Silhouetted against the glow of the gas giant, he wasn't seeing the intimidating general or the brilliant strategist. He was seeing the person underneath, the one who carried the impossible weight of our people's hope, and who had to do it all alone. The loneliness in her voice was a canyon. He wanted to say something profound, something comforting, but that wasn't him. So he went with what was. "You know," he said, breaking the quiet, "for a towering lizard lady who hijacked my life, blackmailed me into being a fake mercenary, and almost got me killed, you're not the worst roommate I've ever had." It was clumsy. It was sarcastic. It was the most genuine, heartfelt compliment he could possibly muster. Tal Isk-Ur turned her head to look at him. A slow, gentle smile spread across her face. It was a rare sight, a smile without any teeth, without any predatory edge. It was just a smile.
"The sentiment," she said,
her voice soft as velvet,
"is appreciated, Jordan Mercado."
The quiet moment was shattered by the harsh squawk of the colony-wide emergency broadcast system. The bland corporate voice was gone, replaced by the smug, condescending tone of Warden Orcapo Trenk. "Effective immediately, due to a rapidly spreading and highly contagious Quarn-specific pathogen, Acheron's Folly is under full medical quarantine. Trink's voice oozed from the speaker. For the safety and security of all human personnel, the KMC is forced to enact Contingency Sterilization Order 12. Jordan and Tal-Isk-Ur exchanged a look of cold dread. Jordan had heard rumors of Order 12, dark whispers in mining camps, stories told to scare new arrivals.
It's a lie,
Jordan breathed. There's no plague.
No,
Tal said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. Her entire demeanor had snapped back to that of a general on the battlefield.
It is a pretext. The ambush failed. He is losing control, and he knows it. This is not a quarantine. It is a purge.
The warden's voice continued, dripping with false regret. The order involves the humane and efficient rounding up of the entire infected Quarren workforce. They will be transferred to long-range disposal barges and jettisoned into the gravity well of Acheron for deep space sterilization. It is a regrettable but necessary measure to ensure the long-term health of our colony. It was a mass murder, gift-wrapped in corporate euphemism. A desperate, brutal move by a cornered tyrant trying to erase the evidence of his own incompetence and destroy the burgeoning revolt before KMC head office could find out what a mess he'd made. Tal-Isk-Ur was already at the comms unit she'd reconfigured. Her fingers tapped specific sequences on the keypad, opening encrypted channels and pulling up tactical overlays in a rapid staccato.
He is trying to eliminate my entire army, my entire people, in one move.
She looked at Jordan, her yellow eyes burning with a cold fire.
My timeline was weeks. He's reduced it to hours. The revolution is no longer coming, Jordan Mercado.
Her voice dropped to a deadly whisper.
It is now.
Jordan's messy one-room apartment was transformed. It became the nerve center of the Quarren uprising. Schematics of the station were projected onto the walls, glowing green and blue in the dim light. Tal's private comms channel, now open to her lieutenants across the colony, filled the room with a constant controlled chatter of clicks and hisses. Quarren he'd never seen. Fierce-looking warriors with grim faces came and went in a silent, efficient stream, delivering reports and receiving orders. And Jordan was no longer a reluctant mule or a bumbling sidekick. He was in the thick of it.
The main power junction for sectors 4 through 7 is here, he said, pointing at a blinking node on the schematic. There's a secondary breaker panel behind a waste heat exchanger. It's not on the official KMC charts. If you overload it, you'll knock out power and comms to the primary detention block and the east side security barracks.
Can it be done quietly? A hulking Quarren lieutenant named Bortrok asked, his deep voice a respectful rumble.
No, but it can be done fast, Jordan replied, already pulling up a diagram of the panel. You'll need to bypass the 3rd and 5th relays with a conductive shunt. It'll cause a cascade failure. You maybe have 90 seconds before backup generators kick in, but they don't power the mag locks on the cells. The doors will just be heavy. He wasn't waiting for orders anymore. He was anticipating needs, finding solutions, seeing the station not as a place to live, but as a machine to be broken. He knew the shortcuts, the maintenance tunnels, the forgotten conduits, the weaknesses left by corporate budget cuts. He was translating Tal-Isk-Ur's grand strategy into the nuts and bolts language of pipes and wires. He had found his purpose, not as some grand, shining hero, but as a competent, vital cog in a machine he actually believed in. For the first time since he'd lost the stray dog, he wasn't just trying to get by. He was fighting for something. All units, Tal's voice rang out, clear and steady, cutting through the tense hum of the room. Execute. For our people. For freedom. The word rippled out through the comms network and across Acheron's Folly. The machine of revolution sprang to life. In the mines, Quarren workers downed their plasma cutters. They turned, not with malice, but with a chilling, synchronized purpose, and began dismantling the very equipment they'd been forced to operate. Heavy ore haulers were driven into support columns. Conveyor belts were sliced apart with their own tools. Simultaneously, in the human sectors, Kovac's voice boomed over the Union's private comms. Walk out! I repeat, this is a general walkout. All hands off the floor. Tools down.
the human workers abandoned their posts, bringing the entire ore processing operation to a grinding halt. A few strategically minded crews sabotaged key KMC transport hubs, just as they'd promised. In the detention block, a brilliant flash of blue light and a deafening bang signaled Bortrok's success. The lights and automated defenses went dead. The heavy cell doors were forced open, and hundreds of Quarren warriors captured in earlier skirmishes poured out, arming themselves from the very security lockers that had been used to imprison them. It was swift. It was targeted. It was brutal. It was Tal Isk-Ur's plan, brought to life by Jordan's intimate knowledge and her people's burning desire for freedom. From their small apartment, they watched the station's security grid on a stolen feed, watching red KMC icons blink out one by one, replaced by the steady green of secured rebel positions. They were winning. Warden Capo Trenk was panicking. His security forces were being systematically dismantled. His quarantine was a farce, his authority evaporating. From the central command bridge, he watched his little fiefdom crumble. Cornered, terrified, and utterly depraved, he made his final, spiteful move. He fled, not to an escape pod, but deeper into the station, to the primary Nocrium ore reactor control room. It was the colony's heart, and he was about to give it a fatal coronary. "He's initiated a full reactor meltdown," Jordan yelled, a new alarm screaming from a diagnostic program he was running. "Core temperature is rising past safety limits. He's going to blow the whole moon. Us, his own men, all of it, just to cover his tracks." "My forces are bogged down in Sector Gamma," Tal Isk-Ur said, her voice tight with frustration. "They cannot fight their way to the reactor core in time." The screen showed a countdown timer. 12 minutes until catastrophic failure. They looked at each other. There was no time. No one could get there. Except one person. "I can," Jordan said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know a shortcut. Through the primary coolant vents. It's not on any map." Tal looked at him, her strategist's mind calculating the odds. Then she looked at his face, at the determined set of his jaw. The general receded, and the partner emerged. She gave a single, sharp nod. It was a gesture of absolute trust. "Go," she said, and he was gone. He still had his earpiece in. As he sprinted down the corridor, he dove headfirst into a ventilation shaft, moving with a desperate speed through the familiar, grimy labyrinth. The earpiece crackled. "Jordan, can you hear me?" Tal Isk-Ur's voice, preternaturally calm amid the chaos. "I have you on internal sensors." "Loud and clear," he grunted, scrambling over a tangle of pipes. "His security loyalists are trying to lock down the coolant access corridors. I am rerouting their command signals to a ghost server, but it will not hold them for long." "Understood." He slid down a ladder, his boots ringing on the metal rungs, and burst into a service corridor. A red light flashed above a blast door 50 yards ahead. "You have a 30-second window at Junction 9 before the emergency blast doors engage," her voice warned. "Move!" He poured on every last bit of speed, his lungs burning. He slid under the heavy door just as it began to hiss shut. He burst into the reactor control room, gasping for air. Capo Trenk stood at the main console, his face pale and slick with sweat, a wild look in his eyes. "You!" Trenk shrieked, fumbling for his sidearm. "The mechanic! You did this!" "No, you did," Jordan said, advancing slowly. "When you decided people were cheaper than parts." Jordan didn't have time for a fistfight. The core temperature gauge was deep in the red. He feinted left, and as Capo Trenk fired his blaster wildly, the shot going wide and shattering a display screen, Jordan lunged for a secondary console. Not the meltdown control, but the emergency coolant release valve. Capo Trenk scrambled to stop him, but Jordan was faster. He slammed his palm down on the big red button. With a deafening hiss, emergency coolant flooded the reactor casing. Alarms blared, then quieted. The temperature gauge wavered, then began to slowly, steadily drop back towards the green. He hadn't stopped the meltdown sequence, but he'd bought them time. Capo Trenk, seeing his last gambit failing, charged him. Jordan, a mechanic, not a brawler, sidestepped and stuck out a foot. The warden, in his blind rage, tripped over it and went sprawling, his head connecting with the edge of a console with a sickening crack. He lay still. Jordan didn't spare him a second glance. He ran to the main console, and with hands that were finally starting to shake, began the complex process of overriding the shutdown command. The KMC forces, their leader down and their command structure shattered, surrendered within the hour. The uprising was victorious. From a high gantry overlooking the main processing plaza, Tal-Isk-Ur addressed her liberated people. Her true voice, unfiltered and powerful, echoed through the vast space, speaking of freedom, of a new future, of the long fight ahead. She was magnificent, a towering symbol of hope and victory, the first flame burning brighter than ever. Down below, lost in the sea of cheering Quorn and cautiously optimistic humans, Jordan watched her. An immense, unfamiliar pride swelled in his chest. He had been a part of this, a real vital part. He should be thinking about Rorik, about how a crime boss would have a hard time collecting debts now that his KMC enforcers were gone. He should be thinking about the stray dog. He could still try to get it back, cobble together the credits somehow. But the thought of those quiet, lonely shipping lanes, it felt hollow now, empty. What was the freedom of deep space compared to this? As the cheers washed over him, the pride was followed by a profound and aching loneliness. His job was done. He was the skeleton key that had opened the door. Now, the owners of the house were home. He was an outsider again, a human mechanic in a sea of celebrating Quorn. A nobody. He smiled a small, sad smile, and turned to slip away into the shadows, back to the life he knew.
Jordan Mercado!
The voice cut through the roar of the crowd like a plasma torch through steel. Tal-Isk-Ur's. It wasn't a private whisper. It was amplified, broadcast across the entire plaza. A spotlight, sudden and blinding, snapped on and found him. He froze, a deer in the headlights of a freight hauler. Every eye in the plaza, thousands of them, human and Quorn, turned to him. The cheering died down to a confused, expectant murmur. High above, she stood at the edge of the gantry, a formidable silhouette against the bright lights.
For too long, the KMC has told us that humans are our enemies,
she declared, her voice ringing with authority.
They have used fear to divide us. They are wrong.
Her gaze locked onto his.
He is no soft-skinned primate. He is an ally of the Quorn, and my partner, without whom we would not be here today.
A new murmur rippled through the crowd, one of shock and dawning understanding. She extended a long, scaled hand, not down to the crowd, but out towards him. An invitation. Jordan hesitated, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was worse than facing down security forces or disarming a meltdown. This was 1,000 times more terrifying. Slowly, almost as if in a dream, he started walking. The crowd parted for him. He reached the industrial lift at the base of the gantry and stepped inside. The ride up was the longest of his life. The lift hissed to a stop, and he stepped out onto the gantry, into the glare of the lights beside her. The roar of the crowd returned, louder this time, a mix of Quorn and human voices. She leaned in, her height still a startling presence next to him. Her voice was low now, for him alone, laced with that dry wit he'd come to know so well.
I liberated this rock,
she whispered, her breath warm against his ear.
The least you could do is come meet my mother.
Jordan's mind, which had handled ambushes, blackmail, and reactor meltdowns, simply stalled. He stared at her, utterly gobsmacked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The first shuttle off Acheron's Folly was sleek and quiet. The seats were plush, real synth leather, not the cheap plastic of a troop transport. Jordan recognized the KMC corporate logo subtly stitched into the headrest, though someone had neatly sliced through the threads. He sat awkwardly, holding a bouquet of bizarre, pulsating alien flora that a Quarren dignitary had pressed into his hands, telling him it was a traditional gift for a matriarch. "Is this Orcapo Trenk's old executive shuttle?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "You did not think I would start a revolution without securing my own ride home, did you?" Tal-Isk-Ur replied, watching him with an amused expression. "My lieutenants acquired it in the first 10 minutes of the uprising. It was item 4 on the checklist." He stared at the pulsating bouquet, then at her. He was sweating. "Your mother," he said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "Right. Okay. Just one question."
"Yes, Jordan Mercado."
"Does she also have a detailed multi-stage plan to turn my entire life upside down? Or is that just a you thing?" Tal-Isk-Ur didn't answer. She just gave him that slow, deliberate smirk. The one that wasn't a threat, but a promise of glorious, life-altering chaos.